Hi, my name is Charlotte, and today I'm going to do a podcast about poetry lessons in school. And we're going to look at how to teach poetry in a way that's easy and fun, and also how it can improve students' writing skills. So, just to tell you a little bit more about me, I work as a primary school teacher in London, and I'm working with a year two class this year. And last year I was working with a year one class. So, I've mainly been working in Key Stage 1 and infant school. As there are many different types of poetry that we teach the pupils, I'm just going to pick four today to talk about. And the first one I'm going to talk about is rhyming poems. These are poems that have rhyming couplets at the end of their sentences, and they follow a specific pattern. One of those patterns is AABB. This means that there are four lines in a stanza, in a verse, and then the last words of every two lines sound similar to each other. Here's an example poem that I found through a Google search. Upon a nice spring day, let's take a look at nature's way. Breathe the scent of nice fresh air and feel the breeze within your hair. This pattern could also change to an AAB pattern. So in the four lines, the first and third lines have rhyming words at the end of the sentence, and then the second and the fourth lines have rhyming words at the end of their sentence. So here's another example that I found on Google. The coolness of the night refreshes my skin. The star shines so bright, causing me to grin. And the second type of poem that I'm going to look at is limerick poetry. And this is popular funny poems that they consist of 5 line stanzas, a verse of 5 lines, and it has a rhyming pattern of A A B B A. So here's an example again I found on Google. There once was a man from Nantucket who kept all of his cash in a bucket. But his daughter, whose name is Nan, ran away with a man, and as for the bucket, it's still in Nantucket. The third type of poem is a shape poem, and this one I found to be quite popular with the children. I think it's because it allows them to choose an object that they want to write a poem about, and then they can write their words into the shape of that object. I looked online, there's quite a lot of them online if you do a Google search for shape poems, and I found a nice one about a star. It's from a website called Jody Paul, and this person has written a poem about a star in the shape of a star. I've included the website link to my notations, so it's you can just click through the link if you have it. And it goes like this. Stars are so bright, shining above us all. Millions and billions shining from dusk to dawn with a silver light so pretty. And again, doesn't have to have many rhyming words in it, but the poem is about a star and the sentences are all based around star. And this person has written it really nicely and they put the words in the shape of a star. So it's actually quite nice. So I think having these kind of shape poems is quite nice for children, students who are learning about writing poetry. And it's quite a nice, different way to approach poems and poetry in general. Last poem style that I'm going to talk about are haikus. This type of poetry focuses on the syllables that a word has, and it's quite a nice one. It is originally a Japanese kind of poem. It consists of 3 line stanzas, and the word syllable patterns are 5 syllables in the first line, 7 syllables in the second line, and then 5 syllables in the last line. So here's an example. I feel the sun's warmth baking on my skin. I watch the flowers reach high. Again, this poem does not have to have lots of rhyming words, but as long as it's about a particular theme and it follows the syllable pattern, then it's considered a haiku. So this was quite a nice one. It's about feeling the sun on their skin and watching the flowers outside. And it's very short. It's 3 lines. As long as the words make up the syllable pattern that they need for 5 syllables, 7 syllables, and 5 syllables, then it's okay. It's quite a nice poem to do. So, how do we get children to learn these poems and how do we get them to write their own? The first style that I'm going to talk about is the rhyming poems, and these ones have rhyming couplets. And I find this type of poetry is probably the most difficult at times because we need to have an understanding, or the children and the pupils need to have an understanding of rhyming words, and having two rhyming words that can be put at the end of two different lines. And again, making sure that the poem is about that topic or is about that theme at the same time. And this can be quite tricky. If children speak English as a first language, they might find it a little bit easier to do this, but because that they can find the different rhyming words and they can understand the concept of finding two similar sounding words that they could put at the end of a sentence. The tricky bit again would be making the sentences make sense, because they can have two different lines and then have two different rhyming words at the end, and the sentences just make no sense. It's also harder for pupils who speak English as a second language, because they have to try and figure out, first of all, what two words sound similar, what do we even mean by two words that sound similar, and it takes a bit longer for them to get that idea across. They could do it in their own language, and maybe if you explain it to them in their own language, or you have two words in their own language that are similar sounding words, you can show it to them and you can say it with them, and then that might help them to understand a bit more. And then the last tricky bit again is to make it make sense in their sentences, because they can have two rhyming words and not have it make any sense. For example, you can have hair, like that, your hair on your head, and the hair of a rabbit, and you could have that at the end of the words, and they, of course, they sound similar, hair and hair, but the sentence might not make sense. So you could say, I have a lot of hair, but I don't have any hairs. Or I have a lot of hair on my head, there's a lot of hair, but I don't have any pets that is a hair. That could make sense, but if you wanted to talk about having a lot of hair on your head, then you might have to change the sentence a little bit more, or think of a different sentence altogether with a different rhyming word on the end. So during class, one way that I've tried to help support the children with the rhyming poems is to look at songs. And we were learning about the Great Fire of London last term, and I chose to look at London's Burning, the song. London's burning, fetch the engines. This song was very repetitive, and the last words were the same, but it got the children to think about what words they could put at the end of their sentences that sound similar. And I got the children to read the words out loud, first of all, without singing the song. And then I got them to sing the song with the words and the tune. And this helped quite a few of them to understand the idea of rhyming poems. It's also helped them to spot the patterns of the repetition, A, B, B, of the words. So then they could then look through the rest of the poem. I gave them handouts of the poems themselves with the words, and then they could highlight the last words and talk to each other about the rhyming words and what words they could then use in their own poems about the Great Fire of London. And during their task, they didn't have to write a lot. They were asked to just do one stanza, which is 4 lines, about the Great Fire of London. So some of them found it a lot easier to do just 4 lines. And the children who understood how to write the stanzas, they were allowed to write more than 4 lines if they wanted to. So then I would come and check on their work and say, okay, what else would you like to write about for the Great Fire of London? And then they would tell me, and then we'd work out together what could go at the end of the at the end of the sentences, and how that could fit into their poem. Now, the second type of poetry are limericks, and these types of poems can tell a short, funny story about a person or a place or a thing, like the man from Nantucket. They have short lines. There's only 5 lines, and in the stanza, and the rhyming pattern is A B B A. So after learning about rhyming couplets and 4 line stanzas, the children can then apply their knowledge to what they know, or what they know about rhyming poems in general, to their limerick poems. They could start to write their own, or they could work together and talk to each other about how to write it or what they wanted to write about. And then again, it was trial and error. Read their sentences to each other, talk about what they're going to say, and then what words they could use at the end of their sentences to make them rhyme. If they really got stuck, then I would help to provide them with sentences. I would give them a sentence, and have the last word missing, and then just give them different choices that they could choose. And then they could choose those two words to put at the end of their sentences. The children I also gave them time to talk to each other. So they could talk about their poems, what they wanted to write about, and then they could work in pairs or groups to create a limerick poem together. And this again helped, especially children who don't have English as a first language. They could talk or listen to what the other child was saying, and then they could work on it together, or they could just benefit from listening to it, to listening what, say for example, if it was a child with English as a second language and English as a first language, then the child with English as a second language could listen to the child who has English as a first language, and just listen to how they talk and what they're saying, and how they create their own poems in that way. This really helps them to work on their rhyming words, and it also helped them with their writing, because they're writing a short story, a very quick short story about someone or something, or where an event has happened to them. So that's quite nice, especially those of them who haven't got the idea of adding description and adjectives and verbs. So it is literally this happened, then this happened, and it's two very quick sentences. It is tricky. I think teaching rhyming poetry to children is very tricky, but I think if you have examples and you model a few ways to write them, show how to work together with the class, especially when you're modeling. So you show them, oh, I've got this sentence, what could go at the end of this sentence? And you can ask them to give their ideas, or they can talk to their partners and they can choose a word to go at the end of a rhyme. And then they can think about the next sentence and what word can fit into the end and create their poem, basically. Um, so yeah, I think that this is quite a fun way as well. And you get the children to talk to each other, and it helps them with their writing because they're writing their ideas down on paper, or they're saying their ideas out loud, especially those of them who can't write as quickly, or who have trouble writing. Then speaking out the words also, it helps them to hear the different sounds of the words, which I think for poetry is very important, because they need to hear the poems first before they need to hear the words, sorry, before they finish writing their poems, especially if they're not sure of how a word is meant to be said. Um, for the third type of poetry I'm going to talk about is shape poems. Now, I actually found that these types of poems are more popular, and I think it's because the children could pick an object that they liked, or that they know about, and then they could just write a quick poem about it. They could use the outline of the object and then write their words around that shape. And with shape poems, the younger children can work on their handwriting and the letter sizing. So they can, first of all, write their sentences out, and then they can work on fitting those words around the shape or the object that they've written their poem about. And with shape poems as well, they don't always have to have rhyming words. So the sentences can be short and quick. They can also have repeated words or onomatopoeic words as well. So, for example, if the poem is about a firework and it's in the shape of a firework, then they can use the onomatopoeic words such as bang, fizz, and zoom to explain how the fireworks make noises or how it moves. Then they can write a short sentence like, the firework explodes, or look how fast it moves. Shape poems are a lot easier for the children who don't speak English as a first language. You can still give them the words that relate to an object, and you can show them examples of shape poems, and then you can model how to write a shape poem together. I did that with my class and showed them how to write a short one. I think we did about a Christmas tree, and how to write your words in the shape of the Christmas tree. Also, during that time, we looked at shape poems at Christmas, and I had lots of different outlines of different objects that are related to Christmas. So I think I had a snowflake, snowman, a bauble, Christmas trees, presents. And during the class, we spoke about Christmas and the different things that they might see during this time and why. And during the lesson, I explained they could use descriptive words such as adjectives in their poems, or different ways they could write quick, short sentences about the object that they want to talk about. And I showed examples of some shape poems from that I found, and we then spent time to write one together about, again, the Christmas tree. And I asked the children to give their ideas of what I could put into my shape poem. Then showed them how to write the words in the shape of the outline and create the poem. So for the task, I gave the children their different outlines of objects that were related to Christmas, and the children could then choose what object they wanted to write a poem about. And I let them talk to each other about their objects and then write their poem in that way. And I think that worked really well because there was no need to have a rhyming word unless they wanted to have rhyming words in there, then they could. Now, the last type of poetry I'm going to talk about are haiku poems. Now, these poems are originally from Japan, and they rely on the amount of syllables that a word has. And the structure is 3-line stanzas, and the first line has 5-syllable words or 5 syllables, then the second line has 7 syllables, and then the last line has 5 syllables again. Now, those of you who may not know what syllable is the sound of a word. So, for example, the word my has 1 syllable. You make 1 noise for the word my. The word because has 2 syllables because you make 2 noises for the word be cause. And the word beautiful has 3 syllables because you make 3 noises for the word beau. So with a haiku, the first line has words that make up 5 syllables, and then the second line for the poem has 7 syllables, and then the third line has again 5 syllables. Now, the poem does have to be about a topic, and the sentences need to relate to that topic. So I think the difficulty of haiku is, first of all, understanding and knowing what a syllable is. And when I was explaining it to the children, we clapped out the sounds of each word to show them the noise. And I used the children's names because this helped them to understand a bit more. They know their names and what it's used, and it's what's used most. They hear it at home, they hear it in the school, from friends, from family. So, say for example, there's a girl called Anna. We can explain to her that her name has 2 syllables, and we say Anna, and then you can clap it out. So you go Anna, or you can click the sounds out Anna, and then you say the syllables. Then you pick another name that might have more syllables, like Samantha, and you clap out the syllables. You go Samantha. And then you do this with other children's names, and you go around the room, and they all want you to do it with their names at the end. But once they seem to have got it, then you can ask the children to pick a word, any word, and work out how many syllables that word has. So they could say football, football. And then they can try it with themselves, or they can try it with a friend, and they just have fun saying the word and then clapping out the different syllables that each word has. There's also a nice video on YouTube that's part of the Go Noodle YouTube videos. It's called Clap It Out, Learn Syllables. And this is a fun video, and it's great for the kids to get up and start clapping out syllables for different words. And they do it really nicely. They have a set of 4 words that have 2 syllables, then a set of 4 words that have 3 syllables, and they go up to words which have 5 syllables, I think. And then it's quite a fun way for the children to get up, dance, and clap out different syllables. And I think they really benefit from that to learn the tricky concept of what a syllable is. Then you can just give them a theme or a topic, and they can create a haiku about whatever they want, and they can write their own poems in that way. Of course, if you find students struggle with this, then you can give them a few words that relate to a topic, and you can sit with them and work out the sounds that each word has. What syllables does each word have? And you can put it into a short sentence and create lines for their haiku. Overall, I think when teaching poetry to others or to children, you first have to kind of try to understand the structure of the poem and the style that you want to teach first. Then think about how to make it fun and easy for others to learn from. I think looking at songs and their lyrics, it helps them and it helps you to get a better understanding yourself about the poem. Especially lyrical poems, lyrical songs. You can see that they have rhyming couplets at the end. And you can look on the internet, and this can give you a baseline to begin with, and you can show your students examples. And yeah, just try it, and then you can do the task yourself of removing the last words of a poem, and then giving the children the options, and they choose the words to fit at the end of each poem. That's quite a nice way to get them started if they really struggle with trying to figure out of trying to figure out two different words that they want to rhyme and put it in two lines for their poem. So I think also allowing your students to talk about their poems and what words they could use in their rhymes really helps them to hear different ways that words are said, different words that they could use, and then they can just write it into their sentences, and it really improves their writing skills as well. So, they're aware of these two words sound similar. So then in the future, they could then pick up on that again and say, oh, I remember we learnt about this rhyming couplets in our poetry, and these two words rhyme. And or even if they're reading a book and they say, oh, those two words rhyme and they sound very similar, they could just point it out like that. Speaking out loud helps them with their words as well, especially those of children or those people who might have difficulty with reading, or they might read a word wrong. And if they hear the word being said aloud, then it helps them a lot more with their spelling and their writing in general, I think. So I hope that you've enjoyed this podcast. If you have any comments, then be sure to leave them down below. And I'll be making some more podcasts soon. So thank you so much for listening. And until next time, bye.